Chelsea. This is my channel, The Fancy Hat Lady Reads. I am wearing one of my fancy booktube hats, and today I am going to be doing my first of the booktube SFF Babbles of the year, which is nomination suggestions for the booktube SFF Awards. The Babbles are some of my favorite videos to make every year. They are video discussion prompt topics that anyone can join in and make a video on that topic in association with the booktube SFF Awards. I'll link the Goodreads group and the website down below so you can find out more about those. So nominations for the booktube SFF Awards are open until I think the 11th this year, which is in a few days. I got my nominations in last night, but I may end up editing them if I finish some other books before they close in some of the categories where I have empty slots. Nominations are a Google Doc that anyone can fill out. You do not have to be a booktuber, you just have to be an internet SFF, sci-fi and fantasy reading fan. So I'll link the Google Doc down below. I highly suggest that you do that, even if you just read like one or two things that you really like and that they can fit in a couple categories. What the heck, do the thing. So the way that I have done this in the past, I think the way I did it last year and the way I'm doing it again this year, is that instead of having like a really structured list of suggestions, I'm just going to sort of walk you through the process of how I'm deciding what I'm nominating this year, which means that I'm going through all of the books that I think are contenders in each of the categories that I've read that were published in 2018, and sort of talking through my thinking of why I'm choosing the books that I'm choosing from that list of contenders. For me, those contenders are generally things that I rated 4 or 5 stars. I am also thinking about my Hugo nomination ballot right now. So some of those thoughts might make their way into this video too. The categories for the Hugos and the BookTube SFF Awards are different, and so that does change what I'll end up nominating for each of those 2 awards. So the first 2 BookTube SFF Award categories are Adult Fantasy and Adult Science Fiction, and these are kind of the biggies in terms of these awards. And if you watched my last video, which was my 5-star reads of 2018, you will know that I actually had no 5-star reads in 2018, new releases or backlist that were adult novels of any sort. There were adult novellas, there were young adult novels, there were graphic novels, but no adult novels. But looking at my Goodreads shelf of 2018 releases, I have my laptop here, I'm using this as reference. I have my shelf of 2018 releases open and I'm just going through it. But there were a lot of 4-star reads for me in adult fantasy and science fiction. And because there are only 2 nomination slots in each category for the BookTube SFF Awards, that means I have a lot of winnowing down to do, especially in the fantasy category. So I'm going to start by talking about the 2 books that I am nominating in this category. The first is The Queens of Innis Lear by Tessa Gratton. This is a long, slow, epic fantasy King Lear retelling, and it has stuck with me since I read it enough that it is sort of on the top of my best of fantasy releases of 2018 anytime I think of that in my mind. So I decided to just park this in slot number 1 and sort of have a competition going for slot number 2. Slot number 2, I decided to go with Spinning Silver by Naomi Novik. Not necessarily because I thought it was the best of the 4-star 2018 fantasy adult releases I read, but because it was pretty closely tied with several others that I thought didn't have a chance. And I think this really has a chance, and I think this is one where my nomination actually makes a difference and it's not just a protest vote. I have this going on with the BookTube SFF Awards every year where I have all of these books that I really liked that don't even have like the faintest whisper of hope in something like the BookTube SFF Awards, which is like a BookTube internet popularity contest, because these books just, like, haven't caught on BookTube, because I read weird books. That is sort of the theme of the BookTube SFF Awards every year for me, is, oh boy, I read weird books. So these are my 2 books that I really liked that I do think actually have a chance in the fantasy category of the BookTube SFF Awards. I acknowledge that I have not yet wrapped up Spinning Silver, and I acknowledge that there are a number of other books that are going to come up on this list that I have not yet wrapped up because I am a number of months behind on my wrap-ups. Those wrap-ups, I actually sat down to film a wrap-up today instead of this. And you may know I've been going through, like, a family crisis since the beginning of January, and my brain was just not there. I could not do it. So I am hoping that I'll be able to wrap my thoughts together to start filming those catch-up wrap-ups pretty soon, but oh boy, it was not happening today, so you're getting this instead. But I'm sorry I haven't exactly told you what I liked about Spinning Silver yet. That will be coming in a wrap-up. But those other books that I liked just as much, that just wouldn't have had a shot in these awards. Number 1, Armistice by Lara, Elena, Donnelly, the second book in the Amberlow dossier, which no one except me has read yet, because what's happening? Why aren't you guys on this bandwagon with me? I don't know. But this was a great book. This series is non-magical fantasy based on, like, the 1930s, and it's about fascism and stuff, and it's very character-driven and very sharp, and I like it. It's all of the things. I do have a review of this on my channel, so I will link that for you. The other book that I thought was totally as good as the 2 I'm nominating in the fantasy category is In the Vanishers' Palace by Aliette de Bodard, which I read a NetGalley copy of a few months ago and still haven't reviewed because I am behind on those wrap-ups and reviews. Please forgive me, a review of this is coming. But this is like a sort of fantasy dystopian Vietnamese female Beauty and the Beast, and it's got a lot of sort of post-colonial commentary and a lot of fascinating, you know, magic meets technology world building, and it's really cool. This, though, it was self-published from a well-established author, so it got a lot of sort of insider buzz within the SFF world, but I don't think that buzz necessarily spread to YouTube. I haven't seen other people on BookTube talking about this book. So I am hanging on to this one for a Hugo nomination as opposed to a BookTube SFF Award nomination, because I don't think it has a chance in the BookTube SFF Awards, but I think it just might have enough hype that it has a chance at the Hugo shortlist. Then I also gave 4 stars to another much lighter sort of fantasy read, and that's The Queen of Sorrow, the 3rd book in the Queens of Renthia trilogy by Sarah Beth Durst. I talked about the 2nd book in this series last year in my equivalent of this video, and the reason why I wasn't nominating it for things was because I felt like this sort of easier reading epic fantasy, while I enjoy it a lot, it's not really awardsy. However, since this is the 3rd book of this trilogy, this series is eligible this year for the series Hugo. So I think that's where I'm going to nominate this, because I think this is a good series where I like the characters and I like the way that Durst is handling different fantasy tropes in this series, but I don't think of the individual books as being super award hype type of books. There are also 3 more fantasy books on my list that I gave 4 stars to, but that are all going to be contenders in the first novel category for the BookTube SFF Awards, so I'll go through those when I get to that category and let you know which 2 made my ballot. So on to science fiction novel. I had 3 that I gave 4 stars to, and for me it was a pretty easy choice deciding which 2 were going on my BookTube SFF Awards ballot. So the first is Space Opera by Catherynne M. Valente, which is such a unique book. It is not perfect, but I still loved it. I'm one of those people who just loves Valente's over-the-top writing. I enjoyed seeing her do something more comedic, and I do think that this is a rather perceptive book when it comes to things like human nature and conflict and art and all of those things. The book that's taking my second slot in this category is Record of a Spaceborn Few by Becky Chambers, which is also a very sort of perceptive, humane sort of science fiction book. That's sort of the science fiction that I really like. I am really pulling for this to make it on to the ballot this year in the BookTube SFF Awards because neither of the first two books did, because the American release of each of the first two books was like a year behind the UK release. So no one was on the same page about what year to nominate those books in, and it sank them. This one actually came out at the same time in both the US and the UK, so I'm hoping that means that it has a better chance at awards. And then the third sci-fi book that I gave 4 stars to was Revenant Gun by Yoon Ha Lee, and I have not wrapped up either this one or Record of a Spaceborn Few yet. I am sorry, it will happen. These will both be in my next wrap-up video whenever I actually manage to film that. I think both of the first 2 books in this series were nominated for the BookTube SFF Awards in their respective years, so it feels like it might be a bit of a shoo-in. I don't know. But regardless, even though I find this to be a fascinating series, it is military sci-fi and it is a bit out of my subgenre comfort zone. And so I much more enjoy nominating things that are more my general cup of tea. I want to see my type of sci-fi included on awards lists, and while I liked this book and I like this series, this is less my type of sci-fi. So next we're on to the debut novel category, which is open to all age ranges, adult, YA, and middle grade, for authors' first novels. So for this one, I think I'm actually going to start with the books that I am not nominating, because these were a couple of the ones that I promised there were 3 in the fantasy category that I didn't talk about up there because they were in contention down here. One of them is making my ballot, but these 2 are not. But these were books in contention for me because I gave them both 4 stars. The first is The Poppy War by R.F. Kuang, which I am not nominating because I think it has enough votes to make the shortlist without me. I think this is very popular on BookTube, and this is one of those things where it's military fantasy, which was a little less my cup of tea, and I specifically want to be nominating things that are my type of genre fiction. So I appreciated this book, I enjoyed it, but it isn't what I'm nominating in this spot. I won't begrudge it the shortlist spot that I think it will have. The other one that I'm not nominating is sort of on the other side of this spectrum. This is The Sisters of the Winter Wood, which is, on the other hand, a book that ticked off so many of my personal boxes, but I just don't think it's quite good enough to be awards worthy. I enjoyed this for all of its historical fiction fairy tale-ishness, and it's definitely something I would recommend to other people, and will be continuing to recommend to other people who enjoy that same sort of thing, but it's not necessarily the type of book I think of when it comes to putting things up for awards. The adult fantasy book that I am nominating in debut novel is Witchmark by C.L. Polk. I'll link my review of that. This is sort of Edwardian-inspired secondary world fantasy that's a bit murder mystery that turns into bigger political intrigue. It's also queer romance and a little bit supernatural. It's sort of a mix of things that I felt like I hadn't ever really quite read before, and I really enjoyed it. I've got a review of this one too, so just look in the description box for all of my reviews of these things. They'll all be linked. And then my second nomination slot in the debut novel category is going to a YA book, and that's The Hazel Wood by Melissa Albert. This is going in this slot as opposed to the YA category because I already had 2 books in the YA category, and so this one fits here instead. Logic. I know, right? This is, again, very much my thing. It starts out very contemporary and then takes a deep plunge into, like, dark, twisty fairy tale stuff, and I enjoyed that a lot. It's also got a lot of literary references. It's definitely a book for book lovers, and I really enjoyed this. I was so pleasantly surprised by this book because I felt like it was a really hyped YA debut, and that can really go either way for me, and this one worked. So this and Witchmark are my two nominees in the debut category. Going on to YA, the two books that I'm nominating in the YA category are Blanca y Roja by Anna Marie McLemore and Muse of Nightmares by Laini Taylor. So Muse of Nightmares actually has a chance. Hoo-hoo-hoo. Strange the Dreamer was a nominee last year. I didn't like this quite as much as Strange the Dreamer, but I still really liked it. I think this is a super great YA duology overall. I am glad that they are popular. And no, I haven't wrapped this up yet. Please be patient with me. But Blanca y Roja is the one that I am really, really pulling for, even though I don't think it has a chance. I have not managed to nominate Anna Marie McLemore's books in the past because I have not read them until after this nomination period had closed, and that made me grumpy because I love her books. She's probably my favorite YA author, and I want to be spreading the love for her books on BookTube. This is not my favorite of her books. I think my favorite is still Wild Beauty, but I would really love to get something sort of different like this on the BookTube SFF Awards shortlist, even though I know it's not going to happen. I know that the YA category is just flooded with all of the books that have like the top tiers of hype on BookTube, and that's fine, but I'm still nominating this. This is fairy tale-ish, magical realism-ish. I talked about this in depth in a sort of comparison video with this one because they have a lot of similar elements when it comes to the interpretations of fairy tales and such, and with how they relate themes of sisterhood to fairy tale stories. And in that video I did draw the conclusion that I thought this one, Blanca y Roja, was the better book of the two despite being YA, whereas this one is ostensibly adult. So next is the middle grade category, which is sort of eternally the category where we all realize, oops, I guess I haven't read any new release middle grade this year, and that's where I am right now. I have actually been reading a decent amount of middle grade over the last few months, but it's all been backlist and classics. And every year I buy a bunch of new release middle grade books over the course of the year thinking I will read these by the time BookTube SFF Award nominations happen, and it just doesn't happen. I actually have two 2018 middle grade audiobooks that I have started listening to. I've started just the first couple chapters or so of each of them, and I'm not sure which one I'm going to end up continuing with first. I would like to decide that I'm really enjoying one of them more than the other and be able to finish it and nominate it in the next few days. We'll see, but the two I've started on audio are Arusha and The End of Time, which has enough hype on BookTube that it's probably going to be one of the shortlist books. And then Willa of the Wood by Robert Beatty, which is popular, I think, but not on BookTube because this is one of the Goodreads Choice Award nominees this year. It seems to be beloved on other platforms, but I just haven't seen it on YouTube. So a few chapters into each of these, I am not yet sure which one I'm liking more, but hopefully I'll decide that I'm enjoying one of them pretty quick. The next category is Best Graphic Work, which is a category that I struggle with, in part because, despite the fact that I don't seem to be reading new release middle grade novels, I seem to be really into middle grade graphic novels, and I seem to like them a good deal more than adult graphic novels. So the one book that I have to nominate in this category right now is Aquacorn Cove by Katie O'Neill, which doesn't have a chance because no one else nominates middle grade graphic novels in this category, except me. I do. This is her newest book. It's got these ecological sort of stewardship of the environment themes. It has these magical aquacorns. It's a family story about grief. It's lovely. It does not have quite the spot in my heart that the Tea Dragon Society has, because Tea Dragons just totally seemed my thing in a way that aquacorns aren't quite. but that is totally a matter of personal preference. Aquacorn Cove is lovely. And then as I was going over things that I had read to nominate in different categories, I remembered that last year I had nominated the first book in this series, Castle in the Stars, by Alex Alice, which is a YA or middle grade-ish graphic novel series translated from French, and that the second book had come out this year and I had totally missed it. So I put this on hold from the library, and hopefully I'll be able to read it in time to nominate it if indeed I like it. This is steampunk alternate history adventure, and I remember from the first book the plot being all right, but the plot isn't really why I was reading it. I was reading it for the art, which is so pretty. I'm having a hard time. But anyways, I am guessing that this will be in my second slot unless it really disappoints me. And yes, translated works are eligible the year that they're published in English. And then the final category is Best Short Work, which I have just decided to accept is the novella category, that like online short fiction isn't going to cut it when all of the Tor.com novellas and a few other novellas that are published in book form are just so much more popular. And I'm just saying, okay, I'm fine with that. I will nominate Tor.com novellas. And so picking my top two was actually pretty easy because I had two that were 5-star reads for me. The first is Binti the Night Masquerade, the third book in the Binti trilogy. I thought this ending of this series was surprising and unexpected in some ways, but it also worked really, really well. This is a series where I think especially the second and third books for me are things that have really moved me emotionally in ways I wasn't expecting. So this is definitely on my list. And then the second book is The Only Harmless Great Thing by Brooke Bolander, which is technically a novelette, but it's from the Tor.com novella line. I have just never read anything else quite like this. This is alternate history with a little bit of sort of maybe near future sci-fi and some, you know, sort of mythology elephant stuff, and it's very dark and angry. I keep getting less and less coherent every time I try to describe this book, but I have a review of this, so you can go watch that. And then I do want to give shout-outs to some of the 4-star novellas that did not make my list because I had those two 5-star books. I am assuming that something from the Murderbot Diaries series will be on the shortlist because everyone from the BookTube SFF Awards loved All Systems Red last year. Artificial Condition and Rogue Protocol are the two books that are eligible for the BookTube SFF Awards. Exit Strategy, however, was the one I really liked, and this is not eligible because it's the 4th book in a series and the BookTube SFF Awards only consider books 1 through 3. And both Artificial Condition and Rogue Protocol were 4-star reads for me, so they didn't quite make the cut. Next is The Tea Master and the Detective by Aliette de Bodard, which I feel super bad now because that's two Aliette de Bodard books that have not made the cut for me even though I really liked them. This is like gender-bent Sherlock Holmes in space where the Watson character is a sentient spaceship in like an Asian space empire world. I liked it a lot. And then there's also God's Monsters and the Lucky Peach, which is a kind of fascinatingly weird time travel story. I just read this one in January, and I thought I had something more on this list, but I think that's it. So yeah, those are my nomination suggestions and all of my runners-up for this year's BookTube SFF Awards. I hope you'll let me know if you've read any of these or what you think of them. I hope you'll chat with me in the comments about what you're considering nominating for the BookTube SFF Awards or what you've already nominated. Time is running out. Anyhow, I hope you're having a nice day. That is all. Bye for now.